Welcome to the MoneyBetter podcast, brought to you by Union Bank and Trust in Lincoln, Nebraska. Get ready for an authentic conversation about how to do money better by making financial decisions that are right for you. Money doesn't have to be a scary topic anymore. Instead, let's get real about the lessons others have learned, then find ways to use those experiences to get it right. I'm your host, Caitlin Moore. Let's chat. Okay, I'm here with Eric Turner, and he is a home buyer. And so we're going to talk about just being young and owning a home and what that experience has been like for you, Eric. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and why you bought a house?
So I'm Eric. Hi, everybody. So I've been living with the same roommate since 2012. We went to university together for about 6 months, and then we moved into a home together. And it was just renting a home for the time. I have a dog, so it made sense to have a dog at a house instead of an apartment so that we had a backyard and we could walk around the neighborhood. And about a year or two into renting this house, the landlord decided to sell the house. And he asked us if it was okay because it was part of our contract. And we're like, yeah, that's fine. He actually offered to sell the house to us, and we're like, nah, we
How come?
don't like this up.
How come you didn't buy it?
It was the strangest split level. It wasn't a split level, but it had the same layout as a split level with it being a 2-level house though. And it was just,
so the layout was kind of just, it was good for
awkward.
renting, but not,
yeah,
right.
I didn't want it at all.
Sure.
Which is funny because like it just got put on Zillow again like 2 months ago, and they did a lot of renovating to it. And I'm still just like, yeah, this is a bad house. But
the layout was really key when you were purchasing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it just felt small for what it was. And like we kind of talked it over, and so I thought it would be easier just to buy a house, having a dog.
Now, did you buy the house with your friend, or did you buy it by yourself?
Bought it by myself. Yep.
Okay. So he moved in with you right away.
Yeah, we moved straight from that house to this house.
And how old were you when you bought it?
I think I was 23. I'm pretty sure it was 23.
And how old are you now?
I'm 27 now.
Okay, so you've owned it for several years. And my understanding is your roommate is still with you, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so you're 27. Your life probably looks a little bit different than it did when you bought the house. Mm-hmm. Maybe even career-wise in life. And so how do you feel about your house now?
I feel stuck.
Okay, tell us more.
Yeah. So life looks a lot different. I have a great job now. Very happy with my career right now. And I also got engaged.
Congratulations.
So yeah, thank you. And so she's living with me now with my roommate, which is great. Like, it's still great. He's probably the best roommate you could ever ask for. But we also have plans of moving someday. So housing market's crazy.
Yeah,
so
it is.
We could get a lot of money for this house, and then we could also find a house probably pretty expensive, but with a great rate. Like, it's just a weird holding pattern right now.
So you've actually asked yourself, like, regardless of whether we want to move locally or out of state, like possibly just sell the house because you can make some equity in it and then go into another house because rates are low and it's kind of worth it.
Yeah. So I went from 1 dog to 3 dogs in the house now and 9 reptiles. So
oh my gosh.
Going from this house, going to a holding house like that we can just buy real quick and try to fix up, which is probably a bad idea because I'm not a super great fixer-upper. But that's just a lot on the dogs and all the animals, really. And going to that house and then going to a house that we can stay in a little bit longer, it's just we don't necessarily see that it's worth it, even though that equity is just like very tantalizing.
Yeah, I'm sure. So when you say fix up your house, did you buy kind of a reno that you needed to do, or you just feel like you need to update a couple things to get a little bit more money out of it?
It's the second. It's more of, I know as soon as a realtor comes in, they're going to be asking for new carpet and fixing the deck and changing out the tiling and the bathroom. And maybe they won't, but I just want something a little bit more presentable because I mean before Alexis moved in, I had three roommates. So it was kind of just like, I hate the term bachelor pad, but it was just us living in, and we didn't really care.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a fixer upper ever. It just,
Okay.
the paint was ugly, the carpet's ugly, but we
Sure.
were just like, whatever, it's fine. We're just living here. But
Yeah.
yeah, now it's just more of, I know just the simple little things, like we just painted, and I know that will immediately increase the value of the home, like by a lot. So it's just simple things like that. Like carpet's not super expensive to replace, and I know it'll go really far in selling the house.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were 22, 23, when you purchased this house, did you think at the time, man, if I fix this up, I could get so much more money? Or was it just like, hey, this is doable.
Yeah.
This works for us. Like you mentioned, kind of the bachelor pad, like it's livable.
Looking back, horrible mistake of like never really thinking about fixing it, because like it's a 1999 house, like split level home. So that would never cross my mind. What my mind was focused on was, can I afford something breaking down? So, but at the time I had, I think you have to get the home warranty, and you can extend that out. So I wasn't too worried about it. So that was just my primary focus, was like,
Okay.
what if the water heater goes out, or what if what if
Yeah.
the roof gets destroyed by the tornado that came.
Yes, yes,
and which both have happened, and like it's just having to be prepared for that, and then also keeping in the back of mind that like, yeah, you're gonna want to sell this place eventually, so you should fix it up. But that was not on my mind back then.
Yeah. So did you have somebody, when you were purchasing a home or looking around, kind of putting that bug in your ear about what you should consider? Or was it really just can I get into a house?
I did my research. Like I knew those bugs were in my ear just by reading them, but it still was like, let's just get a house. let's just get into. And it's regretful because like we got pushed on that timeline because the landlord was like, oh, we're gonna sell it, and then he immediately got a buyer, so like we had to rush and buy the house.
So you felt a little rushed at the time,
right? Yeah. So best tip, like one of my best things that I tell everyone is like, just wait it out. Like we bought a home within a month basically, and I love this house. It's, I will never buy a split level again, but it's a good place. It's in a great neighborhood. Houses will always be for sale. So like, don't rush the home buying process. Like if you're not feeling something about the house, just wait. Like if you can wait, just wait.
I love that. Change. That's a really good line. Houses will always be for sale. So don't rush the home buying process.
Yep.
So would you do that process again?
Probably not. Being able to, because right now, like I haven't been able to consider really moving, because like selling your home, it's just so daunting. It feels daunting, like, and moving in general. But it's more like, I don't have to worry about fixing up the home. I don't have to worry about if the water heater goes out.
You mean if you're renting?
If I'm renting, yes, yes.
Okay.
So like I would definitely at least try to find something to rent. Plenty of landlords out there that would have taken my dog. Like I don't know why we didn't just do that, but that's kind of a bittersweet answer, because like I love being here, and I love being like, we built a huge garden in the backyard, like, so like there's some of that stuff. Like I would probably rent. I'd say I'd probably rent, but it's hard to say.
I'm hearing you kind of in the middle of, there's really some pros and cons to owning a house, even at a young age. You just don't necessarily think of those things, those stages of life that you might be going into. So but the perk of it is you got some equity in your house. So whatever life that you choose from here on out, you've got some money either for another house locally, or if you choose to move elsewhere.
Yeah, I wish I could have rented and then maybe moved to a different city and experience different things. But I am also very happy with, I've been sending that money to equity. Like that will come back and put a down payment on another house.
So home ownership has not been that bad on you.
No.
There's just things you didn't consider. This has been a delight and very informational, especially at your age. I know a lot of people rush to buy a house, especially right now with rates being as low as they are, but it's nice to hear kind of a perspective of somebody who did it at a young age, that has questioned whether that was a good idea or not, but definitely the payoff is in that equity for sure.
You. And
thank you, Eric. I really appreciate your time and your story. Best of luck with the
Yeah.
wedding and wherever you decide to move. Best of
Cool.
luck with
Thank you.
that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. We are here with Casey Franklin from UBT. He is a renter right now, but he has owned a home and he is in the process of purchasing a home. And we're going to be talking to him a little bit later, more in depth about his current home buying experience. But what I want to briefly talk about is the fact that you have bought a home before and you've bought a home with a friend. So I want to hear a little bit more about that experience.
Awesome to be with you today, Caitlin. So my best friend and I actually rented together for almost 3 or 4 years, and it just got to the point where renting was so expensive, it just made sense to buy a house and get equity out of the money that we were throwing at renting. I'd known her for, since 2010. We purchased our house in 2015, so it was a short friendship, but it kind of made sense from our living situation to kind of upgrade and go from there.
Okay. So tell me about the home buying process with a friend.
It was definitely different. It was kind of back when it was still new for friends to buy houses together. We approached the realtor that we worked with saying, this is what we're looking for. We're friends. This is how we want to break it down. And so we got a lot of pushback and questions from, real estate agents and mortgage lenders, because it wasn't common back in 2015 when we, decided we wanted to do this. And one of the things that they push back is, okay, you have to think long term, like what's going to happen if it doesn't work out? How do you move forward and deal with the house and the mortgage if things don't work out and you have to go separate ways?
Had you guys already had those conversations, or was it the professionals around you really prompting those conversations with you?
We'd had those conversations, and it kind of looked back at our friendship and where we were at in our lives. I was 21 and she was in her late 20s. Different things going on in our personal lives, but it was, when we looked at buying a house, it was something that we looked at being long term, and that's one thing that I was always considered is like, what are your future plans? And don't make a quick and rash decision to buy a house just because of where you are currently in life.
Okay, so did things change?
They did. They changed a lot quicker, obviously, than we planned, because here I am 5 years later and I'm buying my second house.
So how long did you guys live together before you sold it?
We sold it after 3 years.
Okay. Did you recoup any money?
We did. So, I would say increased our profitability in the house. I think the markets went up $30,000 between the 3 years that we were there.
Okay.
We kind of lucked out based on, the market fluctuations.
So let's talk about living with a friend. So you've bought this home together. So it would be expected that you guys are kind of making compromises or 50-50 decisions. Tell me some of the decisions that may have worked in both of your favors or not in your favor, or kind of compromised.
Yeah. So obviously when you go into buying a house, each person has their own distinct tastes and what they want their home to look like. The friend that I purchased the house with really liked the classic charm, that homey feeling, and I'm more of a open floor plan, modern, completely remodeled type of house. And so you have to, there's a lot of compromise, and if you don't agree on, specific layout plans or your taste and what you want your house to look like. We lucked out. We probably looked at, 40, 50 houses before we found one that we even, compromised enough to go in on an offer.
Yeah. So who got the master?
She did.
She did. There are things about the house that if you could go into buying it with a friend differently that you would do. One of them is kind of the layout or the room layout. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I think one important thing to consider is, if you're looking into buying a house with someone like a friend or anyone really, is think of the layout in the long-term scheme of things. The house we bought together, the master bedroom, the two main bedrooms were side by side. So they shared a wall and we shared a bathroom. As it worked when we started, it was fine. We were both single and everything made sense to go forward with it. But as people move on in their lives, it didn't really make sense to have the bedrooms side by side.
You said you were renting with her prior to buying a home. So do you guys save money by buying a home as far as your out-of-pocket expenses every month?
Your utilities on the small apartment are going to be a lot smaller than heating or cooling a 3-story house. And so there's, your expenses go up, but I think the important thing is, the investment that you're making in it. And if you live in the house long enough, you'll recoup what you put into it.
Okay. So big closing question. If you could do it all over again, would you do it? Would you buy a house with a friend?
I think that I would totally do it over again. Obviously, there's things that I would, change about it or do differently, just knowing the experiences and lessons that I learned from the first go around.
Well, thanks for sharing about buying a house with a friend. We are going to pause and we will come back to a longer conversation with Casey in just a moment. All right. Well, I am here with Casey Franklin. Casey has owned a home, sold a home, rented, and is purchasing another home. He has a large amount of money saved for a down payment and is very particular about costs and values of the homes that he looks at. He questions everything and he's willing to walk away from a purchase due to various reasons discussed in this podcast. And we are going to discuss them all today. We want to enlighten everyone else of just the home buying process. And if you are picky, you should be picky in the ways of Casey. So one of the big messages that we talk about, especially as I've watched you go through the home buying process, is just because you can afford a house doesn't mean you should buy a house. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what people do is, they save up for a down payment and they think that they've got this big chunk of money that they can put down and so that they're ready to buy a house. But that's not always the case. Just because you can afford a down payment doesn't mean you can afford a house.
Right. So what are the things top of your head that you should really consider besides the down payment? Like when you're initially looking for a house, what do you need to factor in? Just name a few.
My realtor always tells you that, think in terms of what you can and can't change on the house. You can't change location, so don't settle on buying a house if you don't like the location. You can't change space unless you can afford to build onto a house and your finances. So, really breaking down to see, what is my mortgage going to look like with everything included, and is that really affordable?
Yeah.
Your utilities is another piece of things. So, you're running utilities on a house that's 2-3 times the size of an apartment, so your utilities are going to reflect that as well. So there's a lot of additional costs and expenditures that go into a house that is outside of that down payment.
Let's talk about, you're currently renting. What are some perks of renting for you? What do you find valuable in renting?
I think the biggest perk of renting is that you don't have to upkeep the place you're living at.
Mm-hmm.
That's all included in the rent payment that you make. So if something breaks down, you call the office and they come and fix it for you.
Yeah.
Have access to the amenities that your place offers. So you don't have to think of, did I pay the trash bill this month, or do I have to put the trash out on the corner? If I don't have to mow lawns, I don't have to water the grass, I don't have to do all these other things that come with homeownership.
Well, that's if you're renting an apartment. So as you know, I'm buying a house, but I rent a house right now, and we've rented for several years. But we have to do all that. We have to do lawn maintenance. We take the trash out. But I will say, out of the 2 houses that I've rented, or 3, our AC has broke on 2 of them in the dead of summer when it was 100 degrees outside. And our landlord has had to drop about $3,000 in the middle. I mean, within 24 hours to get that fixed, because as a landlord, he has to do that. So that is
especially those big ticket items. So like if there's a hailstorm and you have to replace a roof, you don't have to consider that when you're renting because you don't own the property.
Yeah.
So even if you're renting a house, there's upkeep that you would do, but you don't have to, if something breaks, you don't have to fix it.
Yeah. Which has been a huge blessing. We've had to get both of the roofs fixed because of hailstorms here in Lincoln. We get gnarly ones. It seems like at least once a year. So we've had to get both of those roofs fixed. But yeah, if you're in an apartment, you don't have to worry about that stuff, which is definitely a perk. So what is the one thing that you hate the most about renting?
I think for me, it's just the proximity to your neighbors. You don't have any really divide, especially if renting an apartment, you have neighbors across you, neighbors next to you, neighbors above you. So you don't have that separation of the space to call kind of your own. Okay.
So having been a homeowner, now a renter, but going back to being a homeowner, what is the biggest perk of owning a home for you personally?
For me, I think it's just the equity and the perks of owning it. It's like, my payments right now are $810 a month. I can pay the same little extra for a mortgage. And then if I decide that I don't want anymore, living in it after a few years, I can get my equity back.
Yeah. Yep. So the earning potential owning a home is huge. What is kind of the scariest part about being a homeowner?
For me, I think it's just the projects and that's something that I really put an emphasis on, is knowing what I want out of a house. Some people have that desire and the time to do projects. That's not something that I want to do or look forward to doing. And so for me, I want a house that's done so I don't have to work on projects or do remodels, so that I could just have it moving ready and just go on with life.
Yeah. And that is one thing I've learned from you. You're willing to do a little bit of work, but you also know your limits, where you're like, I don't know how to do that, or I don't know anybody who does. So therefore you're not going to take on that project. Like, you've been very vocal about that.
On top of that, it's just looking at, what is the room for growth in the neighborhood. The market is so hot right now. You're paying, $15,000, $20,000 over asking. And so you have to really ask yourself, the price that I'm going in on, what's my room and equity to recoup what I'm putting in? So if you're paying above market price on a house that requires a lot more projects, that's more money you have to put into it. But if there's no room for growth in that neighborhood, you're never going to recoup your equity. So
yeah, absolutely. Tell us about how you kind of go about figuring out the neighborhood that you want to live in.
So if you don't like the neighborhood, or you don't feel comfortable in the neighborhood, there's no point in moving forward.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to like the house and neighborhood that you don't like. And so that's the biggest thing, is the neighborhood. And then the next thing that I look at is, what's my likelihood of recouping any investment that I put into a house? You can usually judge that based on surrounding prices. Your realtor can get you comparables. Most realtors will be able to tell you kind of like, what's the max in this neighborhood that this house would go for, 4 or 5 years down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard, because we're both buying in a really hot market. And so if you do buy at the top end, it may just plateau there for several years without making any equity at all, even if you put some money into it, depending on your neighborhood. So if you live in a neighborhood where it's a big gap and you have some room for growth, and it's worth putting some money into it, but you may just max out for a couple of years and not get anything.
Yeah. And I mean, your location is also going to determine how much you're paying for a house, because you can't change the location. You can't change your property tax. So that's why always the number one thing that I look at when I look at a house is where's it located? For me, I'm not a big driver. I don't like to drive long distances to work. So,
how long have you been looking for houses?
Oh,
this season
it's probably been about almost 3 months.
Okay. How many offers have you put in?
I think I've put in 6.
6 offers. And how many have you gotten?
0. I've been close a couple times, but
yes. So you've been outbid
many times.
Many times. That's so crazy. All right. So let's move on to some other questions. So what suggestion would you have for people who want to buy a home?
I think the most important thing to know before you go into buying a house is really know what you're wanting to get out of a home. Analyze, ask yourself, why do I want a house? Is it because I like that home ownership, or is it because I feel like I've got a down payment, I'm ready to jump on it? Because ultimately it's a long-term decision you have to make. And so really think of, what am I buying a house for? Am I buying a house because it's going to be me and I like to have my own space, or am I buying a house to, potentially grow into a family? Because that's really going to make an important piece of the decision or what you're looking for. And it's also going to really impact the amount of money that you pay for a house based on what you're actually trying to get out of it. So create your bucket list, have those conversations with your realtor. That way you have an idea up front of, this is where I'm going to start, and this is where I'm going to look for a house. And then as you start looking at houses, you can really start determining, okay, where am I willing to compromise?
Yeah. I had a conversation with someone recently that said that when they bought their first home, they were working with a realtor and they said, this is my price point. I just can't afford anything more, but this is what I want in a house. And the realtor just kept giving them house ideas for significantly over the price range, with the theory that they could knock down the price. And she just got so frustrated with that because she wasn't looking at anything in her price range. And she was so worried, like, what if I like this house and I can't get it because it's outside of my price range? And so she ended up moving realtors because she just felt like this realtor was not trustworthy because he was trying to push her into something more than what she could afford. And I saw some value in that. And it's something I find value in you, is that you're willing to walk away.
I keep telling myself, when it's time, the right house will present itself. I'm looking at a house tonight that is way better than that one. And, had I jumped the gun on that one and put an offer and gotten it, then I would have, potentially missed out on this better option for me.
You said earlier, house poor. And I think for those of us who are in the market, like have been homeowners or looking, we know what this means. But for people who don't, what does it mean to be house poor?
So I would define house poor as being able to afford a home, but not being able to afford to do the luxuries that you enjoy in life.
Yeah, you have a house, but now you're poor.
Yeah, you have a house, but then you can't afford anything else.
All right. So what suggestion do you have for people who maybe just want to rent? How do you feel about that? People just say, you know what, I don't think house buying is for me right now.
Yeah, I think it just depends on, where you find joy or what your ambitions are. The last couple of years have been great. I like to travel. So as a single person that likes to travel, renting might be good for you because it's less management on your perspective. When you have a house, you have to find someone to come on and stop by just to make sure everything is okay, or you have to have someone, pick up your mail. So there's a lot more responsibility that comes with homeownership that maybe people don't think about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say if it's something that you enjoy and you can afford to do it, you don't have that qualm of I'm wasting money throwing it towards an apartment complex or renting a house, go for it.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if it's something that's like, I'm ready to move on to that next step and kind of have, a good investment in my back pocket where you can recoup some of your costs, have projects if you want them, and, kind of start to build your own area of place to grow. I think, home ownership is a good option to look into. It's just, go into it with open eyes and be prepared to have those difficult conversations and be willing to walk away so you're not stuck in a situation where you're miserable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for being with us today. Like I said, I've learned so much from you in the past couple of months, just watching you through your experience than I ever did even as a homeowner.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to join you.
In each MoneyBetter episode, we highlight a community partner that is doing money better. Whether it is a nonprofit, a customer, or an expert in the field, our goal is to learn from their strengths and introduce you to resources that can help you do money better too. Featuring these people and organizations through our podcast is just a small part of UBT's larger mission to elevate the communities we serve. All right, well, I am here with Morgan Hermanek from NeighborWorks here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Morgan is the Executive Assistant and Homebuyer Education Educator. So welcome to MoneyBetter. Morgan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at NeighborWorks?
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction, Caitlin. Like you said, I am the Executive Assistant here at NeighborWorks Lincoln, and I also help with the Homebuyer program. So my role is a little unique in that I do a little bit of everything at the organization. But my favorite part is working with our clients, first-time home buyers, to get them into their first house. So that program involves an education, 10 hours of education just to go over the home buying process, what to look for in a home, how to read a purchase agreement, the mortgage qualifying process, all of that. And then they may qualify for down payment assistance too, depending on their income level.
I guess I didn't know this about NeighborWorks. Even if you don't qualify for the assistance, which is usually lower income, correct? Or a certain threshold, I should say.
Right. Yeah. It's low to moderate income.
Okay.
So like Habitat for Humanity is exclusively low income. And then we say that we're generally like a bracket above that.
Sure. Okay. So even if people don't qualify that way, they can still come to NeighborWorks to get the education. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yep, totally.
Okay.
Education is open to anyone and everyone. Obviously, there is an aspect of the education that goes over the NeighborWorks down payment assistance specifically, so that might not be as relevant, but that's just a small portion of the education.
Interesting. I did not know that. So
yeah.
Cool. All right. If someone came to you at NeighborWorks and they say, I want to buy a house, I'm guessing that's the typical introduction to somebody walking in the door. How do you go about helping them? Or what do you do? What's the discussion like?
Right, definitely. So obviously, there's that discussion about the program because a lot of people will come say, hey, I want to buy one of your houses. And that's not, how our program works necessarily. We, most of our clients purchase existing homes in Lincoln. So I kind of have to tell them about that process. But really what I want to get down to with the client is, why do they want to purchase a home? Some people have been dreaming about it for years and years, and they already kind of know what it involves. They have all their ducks in a row. There's different personality types, right? And then there's others who say, well, my rent is $1,300 a month, and I have a friend who just bought a house and their mortgage is $800-900 a month, and I want to save money. And I really try to explain to them that buying a house is not necessarily a money saving tool. On the surface, it can seem like that. Your mortgage payments or rent, it can be lower than what you're spending in rent. But in the long term, you have to consider all the other upkeep and maintenance that comes along with buying a house. So, when you're renting, you can just call your landlord to fix your plumbing or a furnace. A furnace can cost up to $8,000. So when you're a homeowner, that's something you have to pay for out of pocket. So while it can seem, more affordable, you have to consider all those other aspects of it as well. So that's what I try to tell those people.
And that's really the basis of what we're talking about, is home buying is not just your down payment or because you can afford the mortgage every month. It's so much more than that. And I appreciate that you all are educating folks on that, because it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just needs to be taken into consideration when you're thinking about your purchase price and what you can afford.
Right. Yep, exactly. And during the classes, people really want to know, well, how much is the true cost of owning a home? They don't want to just know the mortgage. They want to know those maintenance costs. And the statistic we give them is that generally they should be putting aside 2 to 4% of the home purchase price for maintenance costs. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be spending that amount every month, but that they should be saving that amount, because those expenses might come all at once, and it may be a couple years down the road, but then when that happens, they have that money set aside.
That's a really good way to put it, because you may be saving for a year for that 2 to 4%, but then your AC goes out and you got to use it all at once. So that
Right.
I'm a big proponent of proactive budgeting, and that's a really good formula to use, 2 to 4%. Yeah, that's great. What else do you talk to folks about when they're having this discussion? So you ask them why they want to own a home, and then what else do you go into?
When we get more into the education, I like to talk to clients about really budgeting, looking at what they're currently spending their money on, and really an in-depth view of it. I tell people if they don't have at least 25 items on their monthly budget, that it's not detailed enough, right? So, for example, something they might be forgetting to put in their budget is annual expenses or quarterly expenses. So we make sure those are all in there, as well as, maybe not completely necessary things, because when people are making a budget because they have the goal in mind of buying a house, they often exclude a lot of items that they're actually purchasing now, such as getting their hair done, getting their nails done, Starbucks, vacations, travel, things like that, because they're thinking, okay, if I want to buy a house, what are my necessary expenses? And then they try to fit it in there. And I really try to talk to them about values. What do you value in life? Most likely when you buy a house, your spending habits aren't going to change overnight, right? You may be able to make a few adjustments here and there, obviously, but you're not going to, all of a sudden not crave eating out anymore. You're all of a sudden not going to want to do your nails anymore. So I really try to talk to them about what they value. And if they value buying a home and they do want to put some of those things aside so they can afford the maintenance and the mortgage, and if they decide they value that over those things, that's perfectly fine. But to really take an in-depth view at their current spending habits, because spending habits reflect your values.
That's so great. I do a lot of budgeting as a financial coach with folks, and we spend the first month writing, I call it the realistic budget. So we're not trying to cut back on anything. We're just trying to put our realistic spending habits on there so that we can get this idea of what does our life really look like throughout the month. And it always comes as a surprise to people when they look at how much they've spent on coffee or fast food or, their nails or hair, if that's a part of their lifestyle. But you're right. It goes back to values. What do you value? And I think when I was talking to you before, you had said, if somebody says, I get my nails done every month, but I'll cut it out, that you kind of challenge them on that a little bit. Like, are you really going to cut it out? Because if you want to get your nails done, there's nothing wrong with that. But let's be realistic, because the money's going to have to come from somewhere if you're not budgeting for it.
If at the end of the education, they decide that renting is best for them in their life right now, we consider that a win as well. We're not trying to convert everyone into homeownership. That's not our goal. Our goal is to create educated homeowners that are ready for it.
That's awesome. I value that in community resources, just to be able to say that we're not here to talk you into anything. And if at the end of the day, you're just wanting to rent because of all the other things that go into home buying, then that's a win. I value that. So thank you, NeighborWorks, for preaching that message, because it's homeownership right now is not for everyone. And it could be in 2 years. I mean, maybe somebody just needs to save up a little bit more, regroup on their budget for a little bit longer. So I value that in a community resource that is really focused on purchasing homes. But you're saying if you walk out the door, it's a win. So thank you for that. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I do appreciate what your organization does and just the education process, especially being in the position that I'm in at UBT. I'm all about education, which is why we're here doing this podcast. So thank you, Morgan, for being on MoneyBetter. You guys are definitely doing MoneyBetter over there. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for having me.
Union Bank and Trust financial literacy materials, articles, guides, blogs, podcasts, and videos are for informational purposes only and not an advertisement for product or service. The accuracy and completeness is not guaranteed and does not constitute legal or tax advice. Please consult with your own tax, legal, and financial advisors. Member FDIC.